Well, as I said, I served in Congress for 200 years. I left in the middle of my 9th term. I wasn't defeated, but I left to succeed Lee Hamilton as the president and CEO at the Wilson Center, which is a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson, who was our 28th president 100 years ago, and who was a visionary in foreign policy. That's what it does. There were some aspects of his domestic record that are very controversial, Wilson's, but his foreign policy record is widely and highly regarded, notwithstanding some mistakes. At any rate, I left to do that because the partisanship of Congress was just intolerable. So I spent a decade at Wilson, and while there, thought about writing a book. I didn't want to write a personal memoir of, I was born in this house and I went to this school and my parents did this, but I did want to write a policy memoir of the things I lived through, mostly in my congressional years. And so this book is about the 30 years since the Cold War ended. Imagine, it's 30 years, and many mistakes that we made, including that I made over 4 presidencies. And we're now in the 5th presidency. I don't work in Congress or at Wilson, but we're still making some mistakes, I think. And the lack of a coherent strategy for U.S. global leadership. We're paying a huge price for that.
And by reviewing the book, by the way, it's fascinating. And I had the honor to serve with you for a short time as a member from Nevada. But your insights, and I could feel some of the meetings that you were attending, although I wasn't a part of the committee, but I can imagine the information that you still receive and did receive. Unlike the balance of Congress, in the balance of the nation, how did you take all that information and then put it into public policy? And how did that work?
Okay, so you're right that members of the intelligence committees, which are leadership committees, we don't get selected the same way other committee memberships are selected, although you were on Ways and Means, which is pretty impressive, gotta say. I never made that, but I was on Armed Services, Homeland Security, the Commerce Committee, the Space, what was it called? Science Committee, a few other things like that. But we are privy to, on the committee, a higher level of classified information. But then if you're chairman or ranking member, you are in the so-called Gang of 8. That is the leaders, both majority and minority in the Senate and House, plus the chair and ranking member of the intelligence committees. And that is the inner sanctum in terms of what Congress learns about intelligence. A point I make in the book is that we didn't learn everything in that committee, and the briefings were highly secret, and I couldn't discuss things with anybody. And amazing. I realized a few years into a program we had called Stellar Wind, we can discuss it or not, but a few years into that my repeated question in committee, which was, is this fully consistent with law, was being answered in a way that did not disclose. Let's just leave it there.
So is it legal?
Did not
Can we do it?
That what we were doing was not in compliance with the Foreign Intelligence Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA. It was in compliance with a legal opinion issued by the Justice Department, but not with the law that Congress had passed. So the technical answer I got, yes, had to do with that Justice Department opinion, not with the law. And I couldn't check anything. And when President George Bush 43 disclosed the whole operation, I was able to check and figured out what had happened.
Once it became a public document.
That's right. That's right.
So I as a rank and file member, I was invited many times to your committee room. And of course, I remember having to check, everything at the door. We couldn't take a pencil, paper, and had a chance to be briefed. But what was it like when the public may have a perspective, but you have more information, and sharing that and to take a deep breath, because there is more to this than you may see? Did that come up periodically?
Well, sort of. I mean, it's not a retail politics committee, because you really can't talk to people about what you learn. You're right. but my district in California made, and I think still makes most of our intelligence satellites. So it was directly in the sweet spot of my district. And I could talk to some of them about some of this because they had clearances. Not everybody had clearances. I was
That's right.
enormously careful, but yes. But one of the things that happened on my watch was we realized that there's a lot more information in public sources, and we made a big
Things out
effort.
there. Yeah.
Effort to include public media and other reporting in the space of the intelligence analysts. And there was resistance because they were used to high technology and spies on location and all the glamorous stuff in the movies. But actually, public sources are a huge source of intelligence. So why am I saying this? Because the public, in many ways, does have access, especially now.
But so much information. Right?
Yes, that's another issue, through Twitter and through all kinds of media that my grandchildren manipulate better than I do. And now our intelligence community uses it too. But you're right. The issue of too much information is very hard. It's even hard in the intelligence community, in the so-called IC, because they can't possibly get through everything, which is why there is a pretty substantial use of technology again, algorithms and other ways to sort through gigantic masses of material.
So throughout the book, and even in the title, why our failure to confront hard problems makes us less safe. And you talk about communication, of course, there's turfs, there's of course the media, and then there's the politics, and then there's the spin. So your book,
you're depressing me.
And you capitalized, and again, not as a member of the committee, but I always sense there's a lot going on in turf battles, but what are we doing over and over
well,
again?
it's not just that. Yes, there are turf battles. Congress was organized for the 19th century. Not to insult anything that goes on in Nevada. Okay. But for example, there's a huge agriculture committee. I think the family farm is a very modest part of the US economy, not to disparage any farmers.
Absolutely.
But there's no technology committee, which is actually how almost everything we do gets done these days. And Congress is, still fighting over all this old turf. And even in the intelligence committees, they don't control the budget for the intelligence enterprise. They don't. It's buried. It's buried in the Defense Department budget in little pieces. And if you, as a member from Nevada, you were entitled to go to the intelligence rooms and find out about Program X in your state and get the backstory on what's happening and some funding. But there were never votes on the intelligence budget as a budget. And even in the armed services committees, and there was some effort to have an armed services person detailed to the intelligence committees to be helpful. That somehow has, I checked on it fairly recently, died. So oversight was somewhat compromised. Yeah, there were all those turf battles. Yes, there was that. But the other point that I make in the book is that Congress ducked a lot of the tough issues over 4 presidents, 4: Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. And now we're in the 5th president. And most of it happened after 9/11. We were surprised by 9/11. We shouldn't have been surprised. There were predictions that there would be a major attack on US soil.
You came, just to set the stage. So you came in right as this was all happening.
No, I came in before.
Right before.
I was elected in 92.
Yes.
I served 3 terms. I left to run for governor of California, don't ask,
right.
Which I lost. I then came back and got my seniority restored. So I came back right before 9/11. While I was out, Dick Gephardt, who was then the minority leader of the Democrats, Pelosi had not yet been elected to leadership. Gephardt appointed me to something called the National Commission on Terrorism. And it was chaired by a Republican, whom I still like, who's gotten a bad rap because of his service in Iraq, named Jerry Bremer, L. Paul Bremer. And there were, I don't know how many of us, bipartisan, and we were one of 3 commissions that predicted a major attack on US soil, and nobody was listening.
Early in 01, January.
Late in the 1990s.
I see. Oh, even then.
And yeah,
Something was wrong.
so something was wrong. And on 9/10/2001, this no kidding, Jerry Bremer and I had lunch on Capitol Hill near here, bemoaning the fact that no one was listening. And the next day, our world changed. So my point, a big point of the book is, after we were attacked, we surged all of our resources to counter terrorism. We forgot there were a lot of other challenges out there. Oops, and there sure were. And we threw everything at this problem, and we didn't have our authorities lined up. And the White House took a lot of leeway for a period of time. This is Dick Cheney in the lead. He was vice president. I'm very impressed, by the way, with the courage his daughter has shown. But he was vice president, and he and some others, including some at the Pentagon, started a number of practices which were not clear to review by Congress. So we ended up with Guantanamo Bay, which is a huge problem. It's part of Cuba, in case anybody missed it. We've rented it for years as a base for drug enforcement efforts for the US. Long story about that. But anyway, all of a sudden we were building a prison for people we detained, some not on the battlefield. And the idea behind it, so I learned, was to have it be beyond the reach of US law. We had a prison where we could put people, I won't characterize it. Yeah. We also had so-called black sites in a number of countries that weren't disclosed. And we had interrogation procedures that everyone now agrees amounted to torture. None of this stuff really went through Congress in an organized way. None of it, certainly not for years. And we ended up in violation of FISA because, as I mentioned earlier, the authority used for this program called Stellar Wind was a memo written by the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. So Congress, I'm not saying Congress didn't try, but Congress had an easy out, not my table. This is bipartisan. The White House is doing this. And Congress eventually caught up to the problem. Our defense strategies have been revised. We now think about, as we should, China. We obviously are thinking about Russia in the context of Ukraine and other things that bear on our security, in addition to counterterrorism. It's still a worry, but it's not, and it shouldn't be the only focus of US. And it was not strategic to make the decision that it would be the only focus. And
today, or of course, I think election cycles never end, right? They're every day.
The perpetual election.
65, but there is a heightened awareness today, going back to things that we were watching in the past, and that's international, what's happening for not only homeland security, but international security, what's happening, of course, in Ukraine, and you mentioned China. And I know being very selective in answering and even the question, what should we be doing today? How should we be handling the world as we know it, or as it's unfolding? As public policy makers, what should be happening?
Well, it's catching up with the reality would be good. You know, making courageous decisions on a bipartisan basis would be good. What is the reality now? The reality to me is that the so-called liberal world order that we fashioned after World War II, which was impressive and served us well for 75 years, is now unraveling. And it's unraveling for a variety of reasons, one of which is it was a Northern Hemisphere world order. It didn't include a huge part of the world, like Africa and Latin America. And Africa is the fastest growing in terms of population continent in the world. And they're always an afterthought. I mean, dumb decision. So didn't include Africa and Latin America, didn't include the developments in technology, the rise of tech company dominance around the world. It's huge. Didn't include things like cyber, didn't include Sadly, this new nuclear race that we're witnessing with Iran, North Korea, and other countries, very sad. We have to rethink, the nuclear regimes we've had. So what should we be doing? Seems to me we should be getting the smartest minds, which hopefully serve, some of whom serve in Congress in both parties.
Yes.
And around the world, the thought leaders around the world and the leaders around the world to try to develop some kind of common approach. And, we don't want a new Cold War. Certainly, I don't want a new Cold War. If we had one, it would be with China more than it would be with Russia. But we don't want everyone signing up on one team or the other. I can't see how that's productive. We certainly don't want a nuclear war. We also have to confront the climate challenge. I'm not sure what's going on in Nevada, but I'm from California and the place is burning up.
Yes.
And there's no water.
Colorado River issues.
Yeah,
yes,
and
you.
And we, instead of saying, well, it's man-made causes, no, it's not, it's this, it's that, it's a problem.
It's a problem. Let's
So
find a
let's
solution.
put the problem on the table and
Yes.
find some solutions. And no one has a corner on wisdom, I don't think. I mean, this is hard. And also climate doesn't respect national boundaries, just like terrorism doesn't. And
Or
so the
social
solution,
media.
or social media. So the solutions have to be bigger than individual governments, the nation state. They really have to be regional or worldwide. And doesn't mean we can't have differences. I think we should confront China on the bad stuff it does. But I also think we should confront them and try to cooperate
Have a
where we
conversation.
can on those hard global issues.
So we chat a little bit before, and I know you're really busy and appreciate your time, but if we could, before we conclude, every day we think partisanship could never get worse, and we're watching, the both of us are watching it, and it breaks my heart. There's little communication. As I mentioned earlier, I think part of it, members don't know each other anymore. There's not a relationship. It's all done with electronics. What can we do to bring parties together, to bring individual people, civilized people together to make these tough decisions?
Well, interestingly, Woodrow Wilson never served in Congress. He was governor of New Jersey twice. He was, before that, the president of Princeton and, an academic. And when he was elected president, what did he do? He set up an office in the Capitol, literally an office. And he went there on a regular basis and met everybody and talked to people and had talked. I mean,
wow.
Talked, not on a Zoom, and which didn't exist. And he made relationships and he got a fairly serious domestic agenda adopted very quickly. Set up the Federal Trade Commission, set up the income tax. You don't have to like the agenda, but he got it done as a neophyte, rookie person in Washington by being there. I had kind of thought, and I don't know if this was ever suggested or not to him, that Joe Biden, a veteran of 4 decades, 4 years in the Senate, and with a capable senior staff, which still work for him in very senior positions, would have done something like that. And I think if he had done that, certainly those before him didn't do it. Trump didn't know Congress at all, to be fair. I'm not trying to be partisan. Obama was, there very briefly, and Bush didn't either. So when you think about that, he had the best chance, Biden, to kind of fix this and help people work together. And there have been some bipartisan groups. A very close friend of mine is Susan Collins, and I salute her for endlessly.
And a big part of your book, it says great things.
Well, she blurbed the book.
Yes.
I mean, we bonded over intelligence reform a long time ago. But the point is that there are these bipartisan groups, the Gang of 5, the Gang of 10, but all that, and that's good, but the Congress is still and increasingly a toxic workplace. And I'll just say one more thing about that, because I know we have to end this, but my theory is that the business model of Congress is broken. And what happens, and this is a rant about both parties, is both parties blame the other side for not solving problems.
Yes.
Because if you work with the other side, you are bipartisan. And if you are bipartisan, you get primaried. That's a new verb. I didn't know that verb when I was first elected, which means that the more extreme people in either party run against you in a primary. And because of the way we draw district lines, which is still highly partisan,
Oh, yeah.
California is fortunately changing that, at least for California. But the way we draw district lines, the primary is your election. You win the primary, you win. So what do people do? They move to their quarters
Further
and
left and right.
they don't know each other, your point, because it's a fly-in Congress, come Tuesday, leave Thursday, or in many cases now, Zoom in. And I think you can vote remotely now. That's a new reform, which I'm not sure is good. But so if you don't know somebody, it's easy to demonize that person.
Really.
And sure. And, you know, way back in the day when I was counsel to a Senate subcommittee, senators lived in DC and their kids were on the same Little League teams, and some of them shared apartments. Just imagine with each other on a bipartisan basis. Don't tell anybody.
And I see, I was a targeted member because of fairly evenly split district. And I think those of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that are in fairly evenly split districts are always the target.
Yeah.
And what happens is that then the extremes remain. And
the center
disappears, and it just whittles and being whittled away.
I was in the center too, and I had very tough races. I didn't get to a majority until my third term. Yes, Blue Dog, you bet. And I still think, you know, budget, you know, fiscal responsibility matters. I'm on a bipartisan commission for Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is totally bipartisan, and I still think that matters. But I also think that figuring out some solutions to hard problems. COVID has been a hugely hard problem, which might involve spending money as long as you pay for it somehow,
right,
are good things to do. And spending money is not automatically bad, and etc. But we demonize all this stuff and we talk in shorthand. And the goal is to make the other guy look bad. And people vote against people in elections, not for people anymore. And that's tragic. I mean, we're going to kiss off something that's hugely valuable, which is the longest democracy on the planet with a written constitution. You know, hello, this is not okay with me.
Well, how about we work on some of these things together?
Okay.
Look forward to spending more time with you, Congresswoman Jane Harman. An honor. You are an icon in the nation, if not the world.
Well, I'm
your
old.
expertise.
There's that.
I encourage everyone to pick up your book. And by the way, it's available on Amazon and at your favorite bookstore near you. I appreciate your time and thank you for signing it. Again, welcome everyone to Politics Aside, where we talk to people that are making a difference and trying to find solutions to problems. So with that, thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you.